My name is Helena Brooks, and for 7 years of my life, I called a garden shed my home. It wasn't a cabin. It wasn't a tiny house. It was an 8 by 10-foot storage shed behind a stranger's backyard, with no insulation, no plumbing, and barely enough space to lie down. I shared that space with my twin boys Evan and Tyler. They were only 5 when we moved in. Back then, they thought it was an adventure, a secret clubhouse, a camping trip that never seemed to end. But I knew better. I knew we were homeless. People hear homeless and imagine tents on sidewalks or cars packed with clothes. But homelessness has many faces. For me, it looked like working double shifts, showering at gas stations, and pretending to my children that we were just saving up for something special. What brought me there? A marriage that ended overnight, no savings, no family to lean on, and 2 sons who depended on me for everything. I could have given them up. That's what people suggested, let the system take care of them. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. So I found the cheapest shed I could rent, $50 a month, to stay behind someone's garage. It didn't have windows, just a rusted-out metal door and plywood walls. I made curtains out of old pillowcases. I laid down 2 thin mattresses and stacked milk crates for storage. We had one outlet that worked. I used it to heat soup in a dollar store microwave and charge my phone, my lifeline to temp jobs. The nights were the hardest. In winter, I wrapped the boys in my coat and lay awake, listening to their breathing, praying the roof wouldn't leak again. Still, I smiled every morning. I kissed their cheeks. I packed school lunches with peanut butter and crackers, slipping in handwritten notes on napkins. You are brave. You are loved. You can do anything. Because I knew if I broke, they would break too, and I had no intention of letting that happen. That shed, as miserable as it was, became a place where I taught my sons about resilience, gratitude, and the kind of love that doesn't need 4 walls to survive. This isn't just a story about being poor. It's a story about what happens when a mother refuses to give up and what grows out of sacrifice if you keep going long enough to see it bloom. Every day in that shed started before sunrise. I'd wake up at 4:30 a.m., careful not to disturb the boys. The mornings were freezing, especially in winter. I'd heat water in a kettle plugged into our one working outlet and use it to sponge off in a plastic tub. Then I'd braid my hair, apply some dollar store mascara, and head out to catch the 5:15 bus to the diner, where I worked morning shifts. By the time Evan and Tyler woke up, they were alone but not forgotten. I arranged everything before I left: cereal boxes lined up on a crate, 2 plastic bowls, clean clothes laid out on their mattresses, and a whiteboard with their morning checklist written in blue marker. Brush your teeth, eat breakfast, pack your backpack, wait by the mailbox for Miss Linda. Miss Linda was the woman who owned the main house. She didn't talk to us much, but she agreed to keep an eye out while the boys waited for the school bus. She never invited us inside, but she wasn't cruel either, just distant, the way people get when they don't know how to help. After my shift at the diner, I'd head to the grocery store for my second job, then back to the diner for evening cleanup. I was always working, always moving. But every night I came back. We'd eat dinner sitting on the floor of the shed. Sometimes it was just cup noodles or canned beans with white bread. Other nights, if I had a little extra, I'd bring home rotisserie chicken and a bag of frozen veggies. I'd make a picnic out of it, pretend we were camping under the stars. After dinner, we'd do homework together by the glow of a single desk lamp. They'd read aloud while I folded laundry. I checked every assignment, even when I was exhausted. I never let them see how tired I was. Then came bedtime. I made up stories about space pirates and secret gardens, about twin brothers who could fly. In those stories, we weren't poor, we weren't cold, we were explorers, kings, inventors. I gave them dreams that cost nothing but meant everything. There were nights I cried quietly after they fell asleep, the sound swallowed by the old insulation I'd stapled to the walls. But through it all, one thing remained: my sons never went to bed feeling unloved. Not once. And somehow, that made everything bearable. The first time someone told me my boys were gifted, I laughed. It was Evan's 2nd grade teacher. She pulled me aside after school and said, "Helena, your son has a mind for numbers I haven't seen in 20 years of teaching." I thought she was just being kind. But a month later, Tyler's reading scores came back. They were 3 grade levels ahead. That got the school psychologist involved. Then the principal. then a counselor who wanted to evaluate them for a gifted program across town. I didn't understand any of it at first. I just knew my boys were smart, curious, and asked a million questions. But I never saw them as special, not in a way that mattered to the world. I was wrong. They got accepted into a magnet school free tuition, but no transportation. It was 17 miles away. I cried when I got the acceptance letter, not out of joy, but fear. How could I get them there? For weeks, I took 3 buses each way just to walk them to the school gate. I'd leave at 4 a.m., change buses downtown, then walk the last mile through industrial lots and gravel roads. I did it because I refused to let poverty be the reason they stayed small. Their new teachers called regularly. They ask questions no one else thinks to ask. They finish their assignments and then help others. They're always kind, always respectful. And then, one day, a letter came from the state. Both boys had qualified for early STEM scholarships. They were 9. At home, nothing changed. We still lived in the shed. We still boiled water to wash. But something inside me shifted. For the first time, I didn't just see my children as survivors, I saw them as builders. As thinkers, as the kind of men who could change things not just for themselves, but for others. I told them that too. You don't have to become rich, I said. You just have to stay kind. Stay curious. Keep helping people. That's what matters. They nodded, as if they understood. And maybe they did, because from that moment forward, their dreams weren't just about escaping the shed. They started asking how we could build something better, not just for us, but for others like us. That's when I knew. This story was never just about me. It was about what they would do with everything we had lived through. People often think strength looks like standing tall. But for me it looked like biting my lip until it bled when the landlord raised the rent from $50 to $75 a month. It looked like skipping meals so the boys could have seconds. It looked like wearing the same pair of shoes through 3 winters, soles held together with duct tape and prayer. I didn't tell the boys everything. Not about the days I donated plasma just to buy bus fare. Not about the tooth I lost because I couldn't afford the dentist. Not about the time I worked 14 days straight and passed out in the grocery store stockroom. I smiled through all of it. Because survival for me meant invisibility. If I broke down, if I asked for too much, people might take my boys away. And I couldn't risk that. I cleaned houses on weekends, scrubbed toilets at motels, worked night shifts at a laundromat where the manager let me nap for 30 minutes during the slow hours as long as I didn't get caught. Once I got sick, a fever, body aches, dizziness, but I went to work anyway. I wrapped my torso in a towel to catch the sweat and set a timer on my phone to stay awake. There was no backup, no one to call, no savings to fall back on. And yet, somehow, the boys never saw it. They saw bedtime stories and birthday cupcakes baked in a toaster oven. They saw a mother who showed up to school plays with a dollar store bouquet and tears in her eyes. They saw effort, not exhaustion, hope, not fear. I kept a notebook in my purse. In it, I wrote down every goal. Find a better place. Get the boys laptops. Save $500 for an emergency. Some pages were filled with check marks, others with scribbles and coffee stains. But I carried that notebook like a lifeline. It reminded me that we weren't stuck, we were moving inch by inch. No one handed me a miracle. There were no overnight success stories, no secret investors, no viral videos of generosity. Just grit and love, and mornings that started in darkness but still led somewhere brighter. And sometimes, that was enough to keep going one more day. It started with a regular customer at the diner. He always came in Tuesday mornings, ordered black coffee, rye toast, and eggs scrambled soft. He was polite, quiet, maybe mid-60s, always wore the same windbreaker. I never thought much of him. Until the morning he lingered. I brought his check and thanked him as usual, but he didn't move. He looked up at me and said, "You have a very kind way about you, Helena." I smiled and nodded politely. "Thank you, sir. I appreciate that." Then he asked, "Do your boys go to Lakeside Academy?" My heart stopped. How did he know? "Yes," I said slowly. "They just started this year." He nodded. "I volunteer there, math enrichment program. Evan and Tyler, bright kids." My throat tightened. I couldn't speak. He continued, "You've raised them well. I just thought you should hear that." It would have been enough to hear those words, but the next week, He returned, and this time he brought a folder. Inside was a letter on Lakeside letterhead offering both boys full scholarships through middle and high school. Not just tuition, but supplies, laptops, uniforms, transportation included. I stared at the paper for a long time, afraid I might smudge it if I touched it too hard. How I began. He held up a hand. You didn't ask for help. That's what makes this matter more. The school has a fund. I just made sure the right people saw your sons. I cried in the walk-in freezer for 20 minutes that day. A week later, the school sent a van to pick up the boys every morning. They got their own laptops, school lunches, gym shoes that fit. I felt like I could breathe again. But it didn't stop there. Word got around. A woman from a local nonprofit showed up at the diner, said she'd heard about us from the school. She helped me apply for a transitional housing program, subsidized rent for working parents. 3 months later, we moved into a small apartment with real walls, real plumbing, and enough outlets to plug in all our lamps. The boys each had a bed. I had a door I could close at night. I kept working 3 jobs for a while. Old habits die hard. But now I could rest without fear. And for the first time in years, I stood still in the middle of our tiny kitchen, let the silence wash over me, and I smiled. We had made it to the other side of survival. The apartment wasn't much by most standards: 2 bedrooms, faded carpet, a kitchen counter that sloped to one side, but to us, it was a palace. The boys ran through the hallway their first night like it was a racetrack. Tyler claimed the smaller room, said it felt cozy like a fort. Evan lined his books on the shelf like they were museum exhibits. I sat on the floor and just watched. We didn't have furniture at first, just blankets, a folding table, and a couple of chairs someone left by the dumpster. But it didn't matter. We had light, we had warmth, we had privacy. And we had each other. It was the first time I allowed myself to dream beyond the next paycheck. I signed up for night classes at the community college, just 1 course to start, Intro to Small Business. I didn't know what it would lead to, but I figured it was time I invested in myself, too. The boys were thriving. Their teachers sent home notes filled with praise and curiosity. One day, Tyler built a wind-powered generator out of soda cans for a science fair. Evan started a book club with 3 other kids. He called it Pages and Pizza. They met every Thursday. I found part-time work at a small local bakery. Less pay than the diner, but more regular hours. The owner, a woman named Cynthia, reminded me what kindness looked like without strings attached. She taught me how to bake from scratch. Let me take home day-old bread. Let me books about business and marketing. I kept that notebook with me, the one from the shed. I added new goals. Save $2,000. Launch a home baking business. Buy a second-hand car. Some goals took months, others years, but I checked each one off with shaky hands and silent prayers. By year 3, we had a couch. By year 4, I had a car with working heat. By year 5, Helena's Hearth, my tiny home baking business, had a stall at the Sunday market. It wasn't flashy. We weren't rich, but we were stable. And that kind of peace, I can't put a price on it. Some nights, when the world was quiet, I'd watch my boys sleep, one dreaming of rocket engines, the other of library shelves, and I'd whisper, "We did it, baby. We really did it." Because we weren't just surviving anymore. We were living. Time has a way of softening sharp edges. Before I knew it, Evan was taller than me. Tyler had outgrown 3 winter coats in 2 years. Our little apartment became too small for their dreams, but it had done its job. It held us while we healed. Evan graduated first. High honors. Full scholarship to a state university. He wanted to study architecture, said he dreamed of designing schools that felt safe for every kid. Tyler followed 2 years later, robotics and engineering. He'd taken apart every toaster we owned by the time he was 10. Now he was getting paid to do it. I sat in the front row for both of their college graduations. I wore the same blue dress both times. It wasn't fancy, but they said it looked elegant on me. I cried through every speech, every photo, every hug. They each held my hand on stage afterward, not out of obligation but love. "You did it, Mom," Evan said quietly. "You carried us the whole way." I shook my head. We carried each other. I never asked them for anything. I wanted them to live their lives freely, without guilt or burden. But then came the letter. It arrived on a Thursday afternoon. A handwritten note from Evan tucked inside a business envelope. "Mom," it read. You spent years giving us everything. It's our turn now." Inside was a deed to a small cottage just outside town, modest, 1 story, with a garden and a screened porch. Fully paid for. Evan and Tyler had pooled their savings to buy it. "A place for you to rest," they said. "A place that's yours." I dropped the letter. I couldn't speak. My knees gave out and I sat on the kitchen floor, just breathing. Not out of shock. Out of relief. All those nights in the shed, the freezer shifts, the meals skipped, the quiet battles I never let them see. They hadn't gone unnoticed. I moved into the cottage 3 months later. Evan planted rosemary by the back door, said it reminded him of home. Tyler built shelves for my cookbooks and set up a little office for my baking orders. And every Sunday they still come over. We eat, we laugh, we remember. Because even when you start from a place of brokenness, love, real, quiet, unshakable love, can build something whole. Something lasting. Something that feels like home. Sometimes I walk through the little garden behind the cottage barefoot, coffee in hand, dew on my toes, and I think back to that freezing night in the shed. The night I promised my sons they'd never be alone in the dark again. I didn't have a plan then. I didn't have money. I didn't have support. All I had was love. But love, when it's steady and quiet and fierce, can move mountains. We live in a world that celebrates loud victories, big headlines, flashy success. But let me tell you something from a woman who's seen both ends of survival. Sometimes the greatest form of revenge is not rage or retaliation. It's rebuilding. It's choosing dignity when humiliation would have been easier. It's whispering "not today" when the world tries to swallow you whole. It's walking into a school office and asking for help, not for yourself, but for the future you're holding in your arms. I didn't win by taking anyone down. I won by standing up day after day, even when my knees shook and my voice cracked. I won by becoming the woman my boys could count on, not just to survive, but to show them what thriving looked like. Now I bake, I teach, I volunteer. Sometimes I speak to women's groups, mothers trying to start over, girls aging out of the foster system, women who've been told their strength is too much or their worth not enough. I look them in the eyes and say, you don't have to be loud to be powerful. You don't have to fight to be seen. You just have to keep going. And every once in a while, someone stays after to say thank you. I thought I was alone. That, to me, is the full circle. We were never meant to rise in silence and disappear quietly. We were meant to rise and then turn around and reach for the next hand behind us. So if you're watching this right now, wondering if your story matters, if your pain has a place, or if your love is enough, let me be the one to say, it does, and it is. My name is Helena Whitmore. And this is the life I built with quiet strength, relentless love, and the unshakable belief that dignity is always worth the fight. If this story touched you, please share it with someone who might need it today. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories of strength, healing, and powerful transformation. You're not alone. Not anymore.